just as a basic rule of thumb, if we limit warming to 1.5 degrees, the current 2% event, or the 1 in 50-year event, will occur roughly every 6 years. If we fail and we warm the planet by 2 degrees, that extreme event that we currently see twice a century on average will occur every 3 to 4 years. And if we are foolish enough to allow the planet to warm by 4 degrees, it becomes an annual event. So these aren't trivial. These are really quite substantial. Next slide, please. Rainfall's much messier. This is similar slides with total rainfall on the left and maximum daily rainfall on the right. For annual total rainfall, we're pretty confident now that in the far west of Western Australia and in a sort of a thick texture line all the way along the southern edge of the continent through South Australia and Victoria, we'll see quite significant declines in rainfall. But it's very hard across most of the rest of the continent to be confident what will happen to rainfall. On average, rainfall extremes are going to increase. That does not mean that rainfall extremes will necessarily increase over Ku-ring-gai. On average, they will increase over New South Wales, but exactly where the increases in rainfall intensity will be bad and where they won't be too bad is rocket science. And the climate science community haven't quite managed to nail that down to any level of detail. So on average, the 1 in 10-year rainfall event will be 10% heavier at 1.5 degrees and 30% heavier at 4 degrees. And there's no evidence whatsoever that those things are profoundly wrong. So we do need to plan for heavier rainfall reasonably urgently, actually. Next slide, please. Lots of other things going on as background. Frequency of cyclones is likely to decline. That's perhaps a good news story for Australia, but their intensity will increase. It's not a good news story for the Pacific because the reason the frequency of cyclones is reducing over Australia is they're shifting into the Pacific, where there are very many highly vulnerable communities. You won't be shocked to know that the risks around fire will worsen because every driver of fire is tending to get worse as we move into the future, whether it's dryness or winds or fuel loads. These are all multiplying the risk of fire. And we're actually now seeing quite dramatic and impressive changes in the oceans. That's the map on the right-hand side, where we're seeing quite major changes in marine heat waves, which are having profound impacts on Western Australian and Tasmanian fisheries. So these are real, these are measured, these aren't predictions, these are things that are happening. Next slide, please. Now, this gets a bit sciencey because I need to introduce you to a concept, and some of you will know about this, called carbon budgets. And I'll try and keep this really simple. If you look at the horizontal axis that goes 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, that's potential emissions of CO2 since 1850. And on the vertical axis, it's the amount the planet will warm. And it turns out it's really simple. There's a very, very simple correlation between the total amount of carbon dioxide emitted since 1850 and how much the planet will warm by. You don't need complex models. You don't need anything very sophisticated. It turns out that the planet responds to CO2 emissions reasonably straightforwardly. So the good news is if we stop emitting carbon, the planet will stop warming. The bad news is if we don't stop emitting carbon, the planet will keep warming. So that leads us to the fairly obvious conclusion that it would be an extremely good idea to follow the lead of Ku-ring-gai and get to net zero real quick. Next slide, please. Here's where the rubber hits the road. The first table on the top of this page is how much warming are you willing to accept? And there's two basic targets, 1.5 degrees and 2 degrees. And the top table lets you calculate the toss of a coin chance of avoiding 1.5 or 2 degrees. If you're willing to gamble a toss of a coin chance on limiting warming to 1.5 degrees, we effectively have 11 years before you cannot emit any more carbon anywhere in the world. You have to get the planet to net zero. If you're willing to allow the planet to warm by 2 degrees, you've got about 30 years, which is a bit of time. 50-50 chances on the future of the planet make me a bit nervous. So one of the things we've done is looked at those carbon budgets with a higher chance. It turns out, because of boring statistics, that we did 83% chance. If you want to avoid 1.5 degrees with an 83% chance, it's 6 years to get global net zero. And with all due respect to anybody who is a glass half full person, there is a snowball's chance in hell of achieving that. So every time you hear a politician telling you we're going to try to limit warming to 1.5 degrees, go ask them some questions of physics. But the 2 degrees is still in play. We can still limit global warming to 2 degrees if we act. And 2 degrees is not an existential threat to the entire planet. It's not good. I don't like it. I wish people had listened to us in 1990 when we started warning them about this. But there is time to limit warming to 2 degrees if we act really quickly to cut emissions. And we've got about 20 years to get the planet to net zero. Next slide, please. There's a slide missing.
Sorry.
Go back one slide.
Go back.
There should be one more slide. Yeah.
No.
Outrageous. So what I was going to say on that slide, because I do have it in front of me, is the first and foremost thing we have to do is deeply cut the emissions of carbon dioxide and methane. We can do that with renewables, reduce energy demand, hybrid cars, electric cars. The single biggest thing that any of you personally can do is actually probably go check your superannuation policy and make sure all your superannuation is invested in ethical investments. That has more impact than almost anything else you can do. So take home message number one is go check that your superannuation is invested in an ethical fund. If we can act really fast to deeply cut emissions, there will still be a gap. There will be a gap that we cannot close because we can't run the planet without emitting any carbon. And that's where enhancing sinks of carbon dioxide into forests, into soils, potentially things like carbon capture and storage might help us close that last little gap between what's being emitted because we can't get it to zero and the net zero question. So things like reforestation, soil health, carbon capture and storage will not solve the climate change problem on their own. We first have to deeply cut emissions. Having deeply cut emissions to near zero, these enhancements of natural sinks and carbon capture and storage should let us close the carbon balance to be net zero. We've got a couple of decades to completely nail that. It's possible, it's very challenging, but fingers crossed. I think that's all I need to say, and I hope I've left time for questions if anybody has any.
Have you done any modeling on the relationship between population growth and carbon emission, and therefore to contain carbon, what should be the population growth, or should it grow at all?
Oh, so the correlation between population and carbon emissions is not very strong. There are plenty of countries with very large populations that don't emit much carbon, and there are other countries that have relatively low populations that emit a lot of carbon. It's over the last 20 years, there has been a decoupling there has been a decoupling of economies from carbon emissions. There are countries now that emit relatively little carbon despite having fairly large populations. So the population discussion is actually a red herring. It sounds obvious, doesn't it, that you would reduce emissions if you had less people. Well, actually, if we all followed some fairly straightforward rules in our own lives, emissions would be substantially lower.
Andy, could I just ask you a question about positive feedback loops in the environment? So, I mean, the correlation that you showed between amount of CO2 and temperature rising, presumably doesn't, or does it account for the fact that we seem to have triggered off some positive loops in the environment, such as melting of the ice caps, where ice caps melt, less heat is reflected by the white ice out into the universe, and therefore heat temperature rises further, which further melts ice caps. So things like that, and permafrost melting, releasing methane. Is that accounted for in the models that you're talking about?
What a terrifically scary question. That is really hard to unravel. My reading of where those numbers come from, which is deep in the heart of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report, says that many of the feedbacks that my personal research is interested in, which is biospheric feedbacks, how the biosphere responds to global warming, are not properly represented. Other people will argue that the primary feedbacks are included, and it's not absolutely clear to me. That said, the positive feedbacks, we really haven't triggered any positive feedbacks that are sustained positive feedbacks yet. The Earth is dominated by negative feedbacks. A negative feedback is where you change something and a response occurs that minimizes the effect. A good example is if you go for a run, you start to sweat, and the sweating process cools you down so you don't overheat. The really only positive feedbacks we experience in our own lives in terms of our own health is when you actually die, because the positive feedbacks dominate the negative feedbacks. In terms of the Earth system, it's not clear that any positive feedbacks have actually been triggered at scale. There is absolutely evidence of outgassing of permafrost in some regions. You're absolutely right that there's a feedback associated with a fast response of sea ice associated with warming. That is included in the things I showed. It will take 1,000 years to melt the Greenland or Antarctic ice sheets before you start to expose significant amounts of land. So I'm not sure that one is particularly significant in that context. So the short story is that there are a range of feedbacks not included in that graph I showed, but I doubt they materially change that correlation.
Good news.
Not really, because that correlation is rather scary if you look at it carefully.
Andy, I'm just going to read a question which was put into the chat box, and it was in response to your comment around super being one of the biggest choices that we could contribute to. The question is, what about emissions from food choices? Emissions from meat and dairy are equal to all of transport combined.
Yes. If you've got a stronger will than I have, switching to vegetarianism and veganism is actually quite a significant contribution. So yeah, it's absolutely true that choices we make about how we eat can influence emissions, but it's very unlikely that everybody is going to suddenly become vegan, however much some people would like us to. But it's one of the reasons I see somebody's disagreeing with me on population. Two things. There are countries in Asia with very low emissions with quite large populations. And one of the reasons they have quite low emissions is the very, very low meat diet. So there's a correct statement there. The reason I point out that population is a red herring is you ain't going to fix it. And I'm looking for solutions. If we suddenly decided that we should halve the world's population and that would help us, well, that's not a useful perspective to have, because we're not going to on a timescale of the next 20 years. Remember, we've got to get to net zero in 20 years. And there's nothing you're going to do about population in the next 20 years that is tenable or ethically plausible. So we actually need to implement solutions that are feasible, ethical, and actually make a difference.
Yeah, but in the next 20 years, if we keep increasing the migration, keep cutting down all the trees in every quarter-acre block lands that we have in Ku-ring-gai, keep building, multi-storied apartment high-density blocks, and then you're saying that's got nothing to do with carbon emissions?
No, I'm not saying it's got nothing to do. I'm saying you're not going to change that in the next 20 years.
Well, if you don't even talk about changing it, you're never going to change it, are we?
Yeah, but Australia, the policy in Australia is to grow its population.
That's a Ponzi scheme. That's like economic growth. It keeps growing, growing, and growing. Where is the resource and energy going to come from?
I'm totally not disagreeing with you,
Yes.
but I'm looking for solutions that can be put in place in the next 20 years. And if Ku-ring-gai decided not to build any houses, those houses would have to be built somewhere else. And that isn't going to have a major impact on net carbon, even if you were allowed to not build any houses, because the state government would intervene. I'm looking for solutions that actually will help.
And Andy, I think it's an important spot to focus on the solutions. And we've got a question from Trevor as well. How do we overcome apathy of the general public to climate change? And I'm not sure if you'd like to take that one, Andy. It's obviously a big question.
Oh, absolutely. I'll keep it brief. I've watched this debate for 30 years. I tell you, the apathy is disappearing relative to what it used to be. This discussion tonight about net zero, imagine if this discussion was happening 10 years ago. It wouldn't be about net zero. It would have been, is global warming real? We have moved so far. The other thing is the financial sector has moved at a rate the federal government is freaked about. The financial sector is shifting capital globally away from fossil fuels towards renewables in a way that actually gives me hope. So I think the apathy has really gone. I think people are increasingly positive about this and looking for solutions. So in that sense, I'm certainly glass half full. I see Peter Horsley thinks vegan, vegetarian is better for you. I suspect he's right. My doctor says not drinking red wine is good for me too, but there is advice I'm not willing to take. Cattle industry is investing in carbon supplement. Yes, that's absolutely right. The cattle industry is investing in, I think, CSIRO-led work to try to reduce the methane production from cattle. And indeed, a huge a large investment in the farming sector is about increasing soil carbon, which is really welcome. So there's a lot of stuff being done, and we all do need to do our part. So I think there is hope.
Andy, appreciate you communicating all of that with us, and I'm sure that would love to have you back for that 4-hour presentation that you promised at the start.
No, you wouldn't.
Absolutely, we would, and it may be another 4 hours for the Q&A session after it. So I'm going to pass on to Marnie. Marnie is Council's leader of strategic projects. She's going to talk to us about Council's response to the net zero and the formation of a zero community strategy framework.
Thank you, Jacob. It's a very compelling argument that we had from Andy there, and I really love the way that he turned what the problem is into the solution, which is really what we're here to focus on tonight. There's a number of Australian communities that are taking action, and the number of people that have joined us tonight is really exciting for the Ku-ring-gai Council team in terms of driving a net zero Ku-ring-gai. So what I'd like to take now is a few moments of your time just to run through Council's response and what we've formulated in terms of a management framework for a community strategy to get to net zero by 2040. But I know there's lots of things that people want to say, so I'll try and keep it as short as I can. Next slide, please, Joe. So just to let you know that our overarching policy framework is our climate change policy. And within that climate change policy, we have a number of targets. So what we wanted to highlight here is that we do have a goal of limiting global heating to 1.5 degrees. And we have been wanting to do that because that obviously, as Andy showed through his slides, will reduce those risks and impacts of climate change compared to a 2-degree or a 4-degree scenario. What that translates to are 3 key targets that we have, which is a reduction in greenhouse gas emissions of 50% by 2030 or earlier. Our baseline has always been 2000 levels. 100% renewable energy by 2025, and that's from grid-sourced electricity, and a reduction in total greenhouse gas emissions to net zero by 2040 or earlier. That's our council targets. What we also introduced in our recent policy is an objective to support the community, all of you, working with council to also reach net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2040. It's probably important to note here too that we use the IPCC report to look at what an emissions trajectory would be to get to a 1.5 degree scenario. And that's how we determined our targets. So they're science-based targets. It's important to note though that that was giving us a 50 to 66% chance to reach to limit that 1.5 degrees. So we recognise that we really do need to accelerate those emission reductions as fast as we can and to keep abreast of the evolving science. And I think Andy's presentation really talked to that. So he'll be certainly keeping us on our toes in terms of making sure our targets reflect the current science. Next part, Joe. So our net zero emissions action plan, that's our management framework that is that we use to work out our management actions and our programs to transition to net zero emissions. So that's made of a council net zero program, which is around fixed assets, street lighting and fleet, and also a community net zero program. Next slide, please, Joe, or next part. So we have a suite of actions that council is undertaking to transition to net zero. These involve things like renewable energy electricity agreements, which Jacob talked to earlier. We have 3 electric vehicles in council's transport fleet, and we're obviously looking to transition those over to an all-electric vehicle fleet. We have rooftop solar at 10 council sites. We've undertaken LED lighting upgrades. We have solar hot water at a number of our sites, heat pump upgrades and air conditioning improvements at a number of sites. So you can see the suite of activities that we're undertaking to move towards net zero there. Our community net zero program, I'm hoping that a lot of you have been involved in that. We have a series of events and workshops that we run that gets people involved in terms of EV demo driving days, technical workshops around solar panel installation, energy efficiency and the like. Just got a comment there. And things like what you can do within the home, composting workshops and the like. So across transport, energy and waste, a number of ways you can get involved to see what you can do around your home and business. We do home and business energy assessments and action plans. We have a range of online resources and technical support from our very passionate team. And we also offer a suite of rebates. So things like solar PV, energy efficient pool pumps, composting bins and the like. So we have a range of those initiatives that are driving forward our community program. Next slide, please, Joe. In terms of what we've achieved from council, we're currently enjoying cost savings of $338,000 per annum. We had an emissions reduction target of 20% by 2020, which we surpassed. And Jacob talked to earlier that we are transitioning to 100% renewable energy in 2022, which is 3 years ahead of our 2025 target. And that includes energy generated from 3 solar farms in regional New South Wales. And then the reason that we're all here tonight is our net zero community strategy. So we realised that we needed to really tie all of our community programs together and come up with a 5-year strategy that would really accelerate action in the community to reach our 2040 goals. So I am currently involved in developing that community strategy, and we see a really vital role for this champions group to not only help us finalise what types of actions will be in that strategy, but also for us to help us work to implement that strategy. So very excited to hear what you all want to get involved in and what you think that we can do to deliver on our net zero goals. Next slide, please, Joe. So we undertook a range of community consultation to help us devise our net zero community strategy. This community consultation was through a community survey, community workshops and focus groups. We had 600 survey respondents and over 136 participants, or I should say 136 participants that participated across all our community consultations. Next slide, please, Joe. So there was a resounding response that said that 89% of people felt that individual action was crucial in terms of climate change action, and that 84% felt that council should be a leader in the transition to net zero. So that's a really strong call to action for our council. The key areas that you wanted us to support you with was rooftop solar and batteries, active transport and energy efficiency. And if you just turn your eye to the top 10 actions, you'll see all of the other things that were really featured in what the community were keen for us to support you in delivering so that we can reach our net zero goals. Next slide, please, Jay. So in terms of the key opportunity areas, when we did an emissions inventory for Ku-ring-gai community, we could see that the key opportunity areas are really energy, transport and waste. We found that there was a 6% emissions came from waste, 40% from energy and over 40% from transport and over 54% from energy. So they're the really key areas that we're going to be focusing on in our strategy moving forward. Next slide, please, Joe. The key principles that we wanted to share with the group tonight is that we really feel this is a shared responsibility framework, and this is why we're really excited to engage the champions in our programs moving forward. Council really wants to work together with the community, business and other levels of government. And while we want to take the lead and we realise that council operations do significantly contribute to our missions, there's huge opportunity within the Ku-ring-gai community to take ownership of this goal and to drive forward initiatives that are going to reduce emissions from a whole of community level. So we really want to work with you rather than just us and them. So very excited that we've got this network to facilitate that. As Andy has said, there's an urgent need for accelerated and scaled up action way beyond our current levels. So this is what our strategy is really trying to achieve. It's about scaling up action, it's about accelerating action. And like I said, it's about working together to achieve these solutions that Andy has somewhat highlighted in his presentation. And the other thing is the lion's share of emission cuts really need to occur this decade. And that's why we've decided to start with a 5-year net zero community strategy. We feel that we really need to start accelerating action now and achieve great things within the next decade. Next slide, please, Joe. So in terms of the framework, we have identified key action areas that we have included in the strategy. And these are engagement and communication, carbon removal, waste management, sustainable transport, energy efficiency, renewable energy, buying green energy and grid decarbonisation, which is basically electricity grid transitioning to 100% renewables. So whilst council has an influence in these areas, we don't have direct influence. I think that there's elements that council can assist with, elements that council can drive, but also there's opportunities within the community to be driving these initiatives. So in terms of the actual actions that we are considering for our framework. Joe, if I could just have that last bit of this slide. This is really what we're wanting to focus on tonight. So I'll just run through some of those with you. So starting with engagement and communication. So we would love to implement a target-based, so resident, school, strata and business engagement program to drive net zero. We'd like to expand our rebate and grant program, provide online resources, continue with our home assessments and also our business assessments and action plans and our events and workshop series, and also work with others in terms of partnerships, networks and alliances. These are very high level type of actions, but obviously we'd be getting into the nitty gritty and really wanting to design all of these programs collaboratively with you moving forward. In terms of the carbon removal, Andy mentioned that once we reduce greenhouse gases to zero, there's still going to be those that are left in the atmosphere. So it's a really important part of our program that we look at carbon removal, and the key ways we want to do this is through our bush regeneration programs and our urban forest strategy. In terms of waste management, we have a real opportunity to introduce a FOGO collection service, and we've heard from the community that we really want to, that they really want us to help implement programs for those hard to recycle items. So we're looking at lots of different ways to create that circular economy and making sure that we're reducing our emissions through our waste management initiatives. In terms of sustainable transport, this is a real opportunity that council has to support the community in terms of providing improved cycling and walking infrastructure. We also are responsible for building and planning controls, and we're looking at a public EV charging installation program. So really excited to be able to have those EV chargers around the Ku-ring-gai LGA as we transition from the current situation to EV and hybrid cars. In terms of energy efficiency, our main area there for action is our building and planning controls, but also remember that the engagement and communication piece, so all of our rebates and engagement programs do straddle these other areas like waste management, sustainable transport and energy efficiency. With renewable energy, whilst we want to encourage the acceleration of the uptake of solar PV and battery storage, there's a real opportunity now for the community to get involved in community-led and community-owned projects. So this is things like community solar farms. We're currently looking at a trial project at the Green Tip site at St Ives, and things like community battery projects. There's lots of different models out there and different ways that the community can really start looking at local energy generation outside of the grid. So very excited to be entering that space. And I think that's a key example of that acceleration and scaling up of action that's required and that we need community support to implement. Buying green energy, we're looking at particularly supporting large energy users to transition to those renewable energy electricity agreements. So we'll be looking at how we can, our council's role to facilitate that in the future. And there is an advocacy role. So whilst council, like I said, can help support the community, we can all advocate for the transition to 100% renewables in the electricity grid by our responses to the policies that come out with state and federal government. So that's just a snapshot for you in terms of where we've been, where we want to go. And I think that I'll hand it over to Jo now, because the conversation will very much then focus on all of these exciting things that we could do together to achieve our net zero goal. Thank you, Jo.
Thanks, everyone. I'll just take over here. It's Emma from the sustainability team. There's a few of us here tonight, so we're all going to help you break down some of these questions later on in the event. But I just wanted to introduce the lovely Jo Taranto. So since 2018, Good for the Hood has been empowering ordinary people to create change across neighbourhoods, community groups and workplaces. Their vision is to create everyday change makers and to make the journey accessible, positive and lighthearted. Jo herself is an energetic and passionate communicator on topics including waste, sustainability and climate change. She holds qualifications in health science and environment and has over 20 years experience in behaviour change. The perfect person to help us on our net zero journey tonight. I now welcome Jo. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Emma. And I'm really hoping my internet stays strong. It keeps saying it's very unstable and I understand how it feels in all this weather. So please bear with me if I do break. I've had a couple of moments where I cut out. So I'm just really hoping it stays firm, resilient perhaps. So thanks so much for Ku-ring-gai, and thank you so much to Andy for his presentation. As much as it was humbling and sort of, you know, bracing sort of information, it did feel like there was a lot of hope in there. And I think without being in denial and without being a toxic positivity guru, I'm definitely someone who lives in the hope space. But I have to say, I'm a pretty latecomer when it comes to climate action. I really only started anything tangible in my life about 6 years ago. I'm 41, and I often wonder why it took me 36 years to do anything of any nature. And so I stepped into community sustainability in my area, which after the perfect storm of, you know, being a mum, going through sort of major weather events and also seeing my son get quite unwell. And it was this kind of cross-section of just realizing that I was not doing anything at all. And in fact, I was part of the problem. And so I quit my job. I absolutely threw myself into very active community work, probably hyperactive community work, if I'm honest. And looking back, I'm kind of shocked that it took me so long. And since I've been in this space and working with Good for the Hood, and also, you know, just really transforming my own life, it really has become such a positive space for me to be in personally, as well as professionally. So I'm also very fascinated why people like me don't do more. And I guess that's what we're going to talk a little bit about tonight. Since we've started Good for the Hood, we've worked with over 10,000 change makers around Australia, either through personal interactions, workshops, toolkits we've developed, you know, speeches we've given, workshops we've done, and we've worked with 100 councils. And 6 years ago, I had done nothing. So I feel like if I can do that as, you know, a suburban mum from Ryde, anyone can make an impact in the areas where they have strengths and passions. For me, my sustainability space was exactly like the chapter, the part of the book from Oh, the Places We'll Go in Dr. Seuss. I was in this waiting place. I was one of those people sitting there waiting for the train to go, or the bus to come, or a plane to go, or the mail to come, or the phone to ring, or the snow to snow. That was me. I was waiting for something, someone else to do something, someone else to stand up and tell me it was my turn, someone else to say, hey, it's actually bad enough that you need to do something now. Someone else to make me feel like it was actually the critical moment. And why I never felt that before 6 years ago, I guess, you know, is a question that I contemplate a lot. But we know that there are people like me in 2016 in every community. They're waiting for the impetus to move. And as community champions, it's hard to understand why they haven't, why certain businesses haven't done more, why maybe certain politicians haven't done more, because we're already on that journey. But the power of our capacity is to bring them on along with us. And we're all waiting on someone to move. And those who are moving are the perfect people to bring the others with us. So my own fears, I guess, were that whatever I did in my community was never going to be enough. It was never going to make an impact. It was never important enough. I wasn't big enough or powerful enough or effective enough or had enough time or money or any of those things. And I guess I hear that a lot from people in the communities, is that I don't feel like I can do enough and be effective enough. And so it's really encouraging to hear from Andy tonight that, you know, that the power of our super, for example, is something that gives us a sense that we can make a difference. And I've just come back from a sustainability leaders conference in Melbourne with some of the biggest brands globally, some of the biggest polluters globally, not a lot of fossil fuel companies, which was good, but certainly big corporations. And they have net zero targets of 2025, some of them. They have net zero targets without offsets, some of them. And it felt to me like they had moved, and they actually at that critical juncture where the big corporations know that if they don't move, they won't have a business. Organizations like Qantas know that if they don't fundamentally change the way that they create emissions, they won't be able to fly. They recognize that you know, the future of safe plane travel relies on a safe climate future. So business gets it. And I think communities, like Andy suggested, are getting it. And the exciting thing is that we know with our response to COVID that when a community gets the need for change, it can happen incredibly quickly. And it's very exciting to be part of that. So if you've been in this space for 30, 40 years and you're thinking, come on, people, I think this is our moment. And I think that change is happening very swiftly, and it will continue to with your support. I guess, as I said, my fear was that I was just a mum. I was just an occupational therapist. I was just someone who loved animals. I was just a country kid who grew up in northern New South Wales. I was just a residential homeowner. I was just someone who loved dogs. I was just someone who had 2 boys. And I had an awful lot of reasons why my impact would make no difference. And sometimes I continue to feel like my impact makes very little difference. But I realize that fundamentally the identities and the communities that I belong to are also my difference. I have been able to create change in the communities that I belong to. And the fact that I'm an Australian living in Sydney and I am middle class and privileged gives me immense power. And so I think tonight the exercise we're going to look at is where your power lies and where your contribution lies, because it is wrapped up in those identities that sometimes we dismiss as not being important, but they are fundamental to your role as a community champion. So when we look at what these net zero champions are that Ku-ring-gai are encouraging us to step into, it's not a completely unique idea for Ku-ring-gai. It's something we are seeing all over Australia in very progressive and active councils. And really the reason they're there is because council can't do this on their own. They fundamentally cannot tell us how to live in our homes. They cannot make choices for us. They cannot work for us. And in fact, if they do, it will fail. Change happens because the people we care about and trust are doing it. When so many of my friends were looking at vaccination and were hesitant about whether it was the right decision for their family, were they asking expert opinions? Not always. They were talking to their friends, their uncles, the teacher at school. What are you doing? How are you doing this? What do you think about it? And we have a very, probably slightly bizarre motivation as human beings to trust people we know. And so people we know are incredibly powerful. And so net zero champions are a whole bunch of things. You are obviously all here voluntarily. No one's making you be here. You are immense, powerful change agents. I hope that after tonight, you'll be incredible collaborators with each other and with other connections that we make. We fundamentally have to be good problem solvers because it's an amazing creative space to be in. You considered early adopters as far as I'm concerned. Many of you will be doing some of the things that we talk about tonight for many years, and you will be frustrated because others haven't seen the light yet. You are absolutely knowledge diffusers. You are people who can embed change in your streets, in your businesses, in your retirement villages, in your schools. You are the people that will bring that information to people who need to hear it. You are local trusted faces. You are not people from Ryde or Blacktown or Canterbury Bankstown. You're not from America. You are fundamentally Ku-ring-gai residents, and you are going to help Ku-ring-gai residents make a difference. You're also enablers of change. You make it easier because you're showing them what's already been done or what can be done. You're creators of partnerships, and I really hope partnerships are critical to what you do. You cannot do this as organisations alone. You're incredibly engaged, which is important for resilient communities. You're led by passion. You wouldn't be here if you didn't care and if you didn't think that this was an incredibly important initiative to be part of. You're active and you're activators. You're influencers, whether you know it or not. And the more effective you are at influencing can sometimes come back to the approach you take, but we can talk about that another day. You are activators. You are leaders, whether you know it or not. We are going to be creating change in Ku-ring-gai, and you are going to be part of the leading force. And as I said, you're connectors. You're also inspiring, whether you know it or not. Someone's watching, not in a creepy Big Brother way, but people watch other people. It's fundamental to human nature. As a health professional, I studied this capacity. We watch other people. We learn from watching other people. And we don't know that there's solutions to something, or even sometimes there's problems until we see someone else solving it. There's a reason why Australians are massive on the uptake of solar, rooftop solar. It's one of the most visible things that we can do in communities. The people on my street 5 years ago, no one had solar. All of a sudden, one person got it and half the street now has it. Obviously, it has a lot to do with the fact that it's made a huge difference to energy prices. It's easier than ever to get. But people who see change consider change. You're also innovators in many respects. And when we talk about community change makers and net zero champions, incredible things are created. And I'm going to share a few of those tonight that I've seen in communities. So I talked before about where your influence lies, and it does lie in the places you're already connected with. Does that mean you cannot impact change on other places? Of course not. But when we're creating change, I urge community members to think about the places they're already connected. If you haven't had a chat to your family and friends about climate action or safe climate futures or climate change or what's going on in the world, you need to. It's an amazing opportunity to have a conversation about what it means to you all here and now. If you've got schools that you're connected or organizations, if you work within a business or an office park, or you go to a supermarket or a place that you're connected with, you have a connection with that place, perhaps weak or perhaps quite strong. So you have circles of influence. And in communities, the people that create change within those are our trusted messengers. And they talk a lot about trusted messages in community change. In climate change, in the climate reality change training that Al Gore does, talks about this. Trusted messengers are really critically important. They're your faith leaders, they're your school principals, they're the head of the fire department. They're people that hold trust because they do good things in our communities. They've got no vested agenda. They're not trying to sell us something. They're not politicians. They're people that we trust because they do things that have significance in our community with seemingly no personal gain. So you may be a trusted messenger in your community as you take on a role as a climate champion or net zero champion. That may be you, or you may lean on some, or you may look to some, but they are in your community, and finding them is incredibly powerful. Again, through COVID, our community looked to trusted messengers, and you can think about who those people were for you. But when, there's a reason why the Climate Council gets, rugby union players and, people from the RFS to speak about these issues, because they are trusted for no other reason than they're good people who've done amazing things in their field. So when we work with communities, we see some amazing initiatives, and we're going to be talking about some opportunities for Ku-ring-gai tonight when we go into some breakout rooms. But the sorts of areas we're going to be focusing on tonight surround energy, transport, and waste. So to get to whet your appetite a little bit, some of the things that I've seen net zero champions really champion in their communities include things like open houses to show solar and energy efficiency changes that they've done, community battery collectives, lobbying and raising awareness and movement and for community batteries, which Marnie talked about. Communities holding energy nights and talking about what the options are and what works for them in their community, and getting involved with some of the council support as well. I've seen huge advocates for solar in my schools, and I know you have schools in your area which have made significant grounds in terms of what they've put on their roofs. So having a champion within a school to put solar on the roof is only done when it can't be done by council alone. It really needs someone from the PNC or the school community to be part of that. Getting your sporting club to consider switching to renewables at your next AGM, getting involved with your strata of your building to look at either solar or energy efficiency changes. And I think Marnie also talked about community energy. So all led by communities, all supported by council, but not driven alone by council. Some of the net zero waste champions that I've seen, sometimes people get really excited about waste, and sometimes the connection to climate change is not immediately seen. The reason waste is a really powerful mobilizer for people about environmental issues is that very rarely do people go on a journey with waste and stop there. It's something we all create, it's something we all dislike. No, I've never met with someone yet who goes, I just love throwing things out, just love litter, I love legal dumping. People do it and create it for different reasons. but no one really loves it fundamentally. So Waste Champions are a great way to get people who've really not even considered anything. And it's also the ultimate footprint of our consumption. It leaves us behind this trail of what's left. So things I've seen community champions achieve with waste is people educating others about compost, people creating share libraries, community gardens, becoming compost hosts, becoming avid repairers and volunteering at the repair cafes, getting involved in community repair spaces for appliances, bikes, getting involved in local area cleanups, using school uniforms to recycle as part of a community campaign or a school campaign, business owners who are making, who become hubs for community recycling and return of items back to store, and you know, you name it, a billion boomerang bag groups and communities that get created around those as well. All again created by community-led champions. And transport is obviously one that we sometimes feel a little bit helpless with or feel a bit tied to, but there's some really great ways that people can take action on transport. That doesn't mean, you know, just lobbying or asking for change from others. I know transport is obviously something we are defined by what access we have, but you know, I've seen people champion walking school buses, EV car shares, community bike libraries, people fundraising to get their organisations to have e-bikes, community bike repairs, cycling without age communities linked to aged care facilities, cargo bike rentals, workshops teaching kids how to ride bikes safely, business owners who encourage their staff to park for the planet and encourage bike parking and provide them a place to put their bikes or maybe get changed after their ride. And maybe hosting a film night about cycling. I've seen that done. I've even seen a community member write a book about why bikes are cool for girls. So there's plenty of ways that we can look at transport and what we can do for net zero. As I think Andy mentioned, there's a lot of things that we can do as individuals. There's obviously a lot of things we can't do as individuals either. And there's a really great article, and I'll share it with Emma, the link. It's a little op-ed piece that was just released last week, which talks about not only the power of your carbon footprint, which ultimately I think all of you have probably got in a fairly good position. Most people I speak to who are willing to step into this space and do more feel pretty good about what they're doing at home, or maybe feel like they've at least started on their journey. And the problem with focusing on only our own consumption at home is it really doesn't motivate anyone else or move anyone else to change. And we've just talked about the fact that we need to move quickly. So we need to look beyond just our consumption. And as Andy said, there's a lot of things that we just won't do at home ourselves for different reasons. That does not mean we cannot be net zero. That does not mean that others can't take action in areas too. So consumption is obviously important. Looking at how you spend your money and what you eat at home and what you buy is important. But it's also important to consider the choices you make. And as Andy mentioned, that comes to where you invest your money. That comes down to, you know, whether you travel overseas. That comes back to, you know, the sort of, you know, whether you do decide to have children. All of those life choices, lifestyle choices are important. It might include where you work. It might include the fact that you've left somewhere. And I was in the Hunter last week and I spoke to a lot of people who had left coal mining communities and started working in an area which felt more aligned. So our choices are important. And where we put our attention is also important. So if you are thinking about these issues regularly, if you're making it a part of your life and embedded into what you do, that is also important. You have the capacity to create collective action, and sometimes activism is incredibly important too. It's obviously not going to be the core focus of this group, but activism is an important part of what we need to do as well. So I'd ask yourself, you know, how can you incorporate your values into your consumption habits and lifestyle expectations? You know, how you donate and invest your money through your choices. But how much attention are you actually focusing on the climate crisis? How many hours are you devoting to this? And fundamentally, why I changed career. And a lot of people are doing that. So this is from the author of Climate Communications, and she just said, she's a business, she said, what's important is that someone knows that we're doing everything they can and that we have to do as much as we can to get there as fast as we can. So you are someone who can enable others to take that step. You are also going to know that by getting involved in Net Zero Ku-ring-gai, that you will also be doing everything you can within your capabilities. And that's why we're going to talk about a little exercise now. Now, my previous life, disclaimer, I was an occupational therapist. So I am prone to a few little twee moments. So please bear with me. This does make people cringe initially, but I will tell you why I'm going to do it. At the beginning of tonight, my talk, I mentioned the fact that I was just a mum and I was just, you know, a homeowner, and I just lived in Ryde and I just lived in Australia, and that felt like all the reasons why I shouldn't do anything. And I hear that from a lot of people. But those reasons are exactly the reasons why I needed to do something, and they're exactly my superpowers. So we're going to get you to think about, I'm going to talk about joining the Facebook group as well. I'll jump into that. So Emma's going to share a link in a second. We're also going to stay connected after today. So we have set up a Net Zero Ku-ring-gai group where we can stay connected. I've already seen some amazing events shared through the chat. There's a lot of discussion. That needs to continue, and it's a really powerful place to create a community that we can continue to mobilize. So Emma will be sharing that, and I'd urge you all to get involved. The one thing I know that's helped me continue to have collective action is building a community around me. And so I'd urge you all to get involved. So what I'm going to get you to do tonight, and I would encourage you to do this. Some people sit back and think, I'm not doing that. Please do this. And the reason I want you to do this is it can really help frame where your contribution is. Now, you may well already be on the road and know exactly what your contribution to Ku-ring-gai and Net Zero is. But this may help you extend it. It may help you make it more powerful. It might add an element that you haven't thought of before. So what I'm going to get you to do in a second is to think about your own position. Stop thinking about council for a second. Stop thinking about the federal government or the rain or your dog. Just think about you for a moment. And I want you on the piece of paper in front of you to start thinking about all of the places that you are connected to in your community. So if you can start on this community. Oh, sorry, is it going to work? No. Start on the communities section over here. And then we're going to move to identities, what you're excited and passionate about, what you actually think you're quite good at, and then what you think Ku-ring-gai needs. Now, we've already heard a little bit about what Ku-ring-gai needs and what the planet needs, but I want you to keep it local. So I'm going to give you an example because some people look at this and go, well, I don't know what this means. So I'm going to do it for me. And this is a real life example and a real project I'm working on. So it's actually been quite helpful. The other on the sides, there's also some connection. You'll see over here. Sorry, I'm doing that again. Oh, I'll get over here. There's a section here that says connections, no-brainer connections. Just, of course, we'd work with that person, or of course, I'd have a link with that person. And over here, I'm going to get you to think about, wouldn't that be awesome if we could do that sort of stuff? So I'm going to show you what I've done, and then I'm going to give you a bit of time to work through that. Then what we're going to do is get you to use a platform called Mentimeter, which you've probably used before in the consultation session that you attended if you did last year. So we're going to get you to use Mentimeter to enter in some of your thoughts and contributions. Now, we're going to keep it short in there. It's a bit like a Twitter account. You can only tweet a few characters, but I'd really encourage you to contribute significantly to the Mentimeter, and we're going to capture all of those in a big word cloud. And I hope that you feel inspired once you see all of the ways that we can contribute to net zero in Ku-ring-gai. So here's me. I'm not going to go through all of this and bore you to death, but My identities or my communities first is I'm a member of the Macquarie University Incubator. I'm on my school P&C. I live in North Ryde on a street. I haven't put it on there in case anyone wants to visit me. I'm sure you won't. I'm part of 2 council committees in my own area of Ryde. I'm a customer at the North Ryde Shopping Centre. I'm a Bendigo Bank customer. I'm a member of the Social Enterprise Council of New South Wales. I'm a member of the Waste Management Association. I'm a member of the Gladesville Business Chamber. I'm in North Ryde Soccer Club. I'm part of the Friends of Lane Cove National Park. That's just a snapshot. It's not comprehensive. I've still got other areas that I'm members of. But you'll see there's informal and formal communities that I'm connected to. Now, communities are generally linked to identities. And the reason I get people to think about your identities is often it triggers you to realize that you're actually part of a lot more communities than you realize. So for me, I'm a mum, I'm a P&C member, I'm a small business owner, I'm a gardener, I'm a bush carer, I'm a vegetarian, Andy. I'm a brunette. Who knows? There's maybe a brunette climate change group out there. I'm a lapsed Christian. I am an ex-farmer, or at least of a 6th generation farming family. I have Scottish and German heritage. They're just some of my identities. They're not all of them. The things that light me up are gardening, walking, daggy dancing, speaking to people, music festivals, live music, comedy, The Office, America, the music of the Beatles, and going to op shops. My strengths, as I would see it, is being incredibly empathetic. I'm good at speaking. I'm great at multitasking. I'm a single mum and I have a small business. It's the queen of multitasking. I've been great at navigating the startup world. I'm good at design thinking and entrepreneurship. I'm also great at comms and marketing. I know that what's needed in my area in Ryde is leadership on solar in my son's school. They've tried, they've failed, they cannot get there. I believe that local businesses in my area need more support for sustainability. I think we need more fit locals who are visible on climate change and action in my, what I would consider fairly conservative community. I also think we need more places to compost in my community. So I've decided to focus that my contribution for Ryde, and it's not just one area obviously, but if I was to try and refine it right here and now, would be to get my son's school tackling sustainability through my advocacy and engagement. And obviously I've gone on the side there talking about the sorts of connections that would make it easier, solar, my schools, my council. And then I thought on the other side, the things that would make it really exciting would be, wouldn't it be awesome if Tesla, donated a battery through our school, or maybe, Craig Newcastle can come and do a roadshow to all the schools in my community, or Ronnie Khan could come and visit my school. So that's just an example. I want you to do that for yourself. So we're going to give you some time now, and then we're going to, we'll give you about just under 10 minutes. It's a long time, but I would love you to spend a bit of energy on this, because when we go into the breakout rooms, I'm hoping you'll use this as a base to look at the connections that other people have and the opportunities that other people have. It also helps frame this back on what we can bring to the community and not what the community needs to do for us. And that wasn't a mantra from council at all. That's my strong belief, is that we need to bring this to our community as champions. So I don't have any thinking music, but I'm going to mute my sound for a second. I'll go back to the form before. So if you can just in front of you start, even the facilitators from council, I'd urge you to do that. And we'll check back in about 10 minutes, not quite 10. Now, as you're going through and starting to think, you might have a very clear path. Karen's about to, because we've got a few people having to drop off too. We're going to share the link for Mentimeter now, which is the platform we want you to enter in some of your thoughts and contributions there. So if you've got any questions about how to use it, basically it'll be following the link and then entering a code which will prompt you to pop up. Right. Now, if anyone's having trouble with that and feel like this is beyond, oh yeah, and I'll go back to my example just so if anyone needs a little bit of inspo or what not to do. Yeah, so if anyone's having problems with Mentimeter, don't worry. We're also going to save all of the chat comments tonight. We also will have other opportunities for you to add yours. So if you would just prefer to pop them in the chat, we can add those to the contribution as well. And then, but yeah, if you know how to use the thumbs up, we might maybe get people to say whether they're able to get into Mentimeter. I'll jump. Maybe if anyone's having, yep, Jacob's in, great. Anyone else into, yep, Rod's in, brilliant. Just let me know if you're having any problems. Great, thank you, Martin. Great, all right. So what I can share at people's responses as they start to pop up. Yeah, so your contribution is kind of where you feel like you're going to be able to offer something as a net zero champion in Ku-ring-gai. Maybe you don't know yet, maybe you just know the space. It'll only be a couple of words, so it doesn't have to be a big essay. But yeah, where you feel like your energy is going to be best placed or best received. Yeah, great. So I'm going to in a second. Now, I'm sorry if you're still looking at that, but I will jump out in a sec so we can share the Mentimeter. We've probably got another couple of minutes, but I'm keen to move in so we don't lose too many more. I know it's a tough time of night. So Karen, what I might do, if you want to take a screenshot, you also have it in your Word, in a Word doc that's been emailed out just before the thing. And I would urge you to come back to this. I also know from a lot of community work, it's helpful to focus on what sustains you too in this space. There's a lot of sometimes burnout when people are doing something a bit extra. So it's useful to come back to this in terms of what will fit in with your world and not create too many extra stresses for you. So I'll stop sharing for now. Karen's going to share our Mentimeter results, and let's just have a look at where our contributions are looking like they're going to be. Awesome. So if you can keep entering into Menti, enter more than one if you've got a few, you've got some areas where you feel like this is going to be a multi-pronged experience. Great. I love that lead by example. That's great. Oh, I'd love to know how people are going to educate their neighbours. That's always such an exciting frontier. So it either goes down beautifully or terribly. Awesome. Ooh, I got a few more. Excellent. Sharing ideas on Facebook. I love that. Very simple, easy. Breaking up with gas. Great. Emma's shared an amazing event that's coming up too, which Electrify Everything. Really fantastic speaker. So connecting with others. I love that. Connecting with others and building relationships. Really powerful. Creative reuse. Beautiful. Borrowing, not buying. Fantastic. All right. Well, feel free to keep throwing some items in there. We're going to add to our Mentimeter experience in a second, but before we do that, we are going to head into some breakout rooms soon. And the reason we're going to do that is we want us to just dig a bit more deeply into some of the key areas which we've already mentioned, which is waste, transport, and energy. Now, when you contributed to the strategy, and Marnie's already touched on it, there was some really key areas that Ku-ring-gai community can help reduce their emissions. And so you've probably already got one in your head, which you might feel particularly passionate about or particularly interested in. And so we'd encourage you to head into the breakout room that you've either already been selected into, I think, Karen, or will about to be put into. So I'll hand over to Karen. Is there anything they need to do, Karen, from your end as you put in the breakout rooms? Now, this is going to go for, we've got about 10 minutes probably, given that we've got a lot smaller groups. And then we're just going to come back and share some of that information through that we've entered into Mentimeter. Now, you will have a facilitator in your breakout room from council or myself. And so they will help guide the discussion. We just encourage you to give everyone an opportunity to stay as solutions focused as possible, and really build on those connections and contributions that you think you've got a firm grounding in. All right, over to you, Karen.
Hi, everyone. So you won't have to do anything. I'm just going to open all the rooms up and let you get started. Hi everyone. I'm sorry, not sure why it ended early, but I will open all rooms again. Sorry about
That's all right.
that. So you'll be invited to join your rooms again. So same process.
I don't know if anyone else cut out mid a really amazing piece of information, but Penelope was about to unlock the secret source of emissions reduction. Anyway, if you were that feeling like you maybe missed a moment, then because it was quick, don't be too concerned. I'm sure we'll follow up if we can't get the information. Put it in the chat now. We're putting it in Mentimeter. Karen's about to share what we've already got. And then we're going to come to a close shortly. But I'd love to hear from a little bit from the groups as we look at the information up on the screen. What stood out? I was in a group with Emma. Emma, do you want to we've got a lot of information.
Yeah, look, I can speak for the group. I'll be quick. One of the main, points we looked at was some of those big ticket items. So we ended up talking a bit more about energy. So things like solar panels and hot water heat pumps and those big purchase items. And Ian and Penelope were both saying, there's challenges around, what system do we install and a preferred supplier and providing people with education around that and letting them understand that really if you do put a solar array in, it can pay itself in, within about 4 years for some of them. So it was just, we tried to look at some of those challenges that people find and how we could tackle those.
Yep, great. What about you, Peter? How'd you go in your group?
Oh, we had a great discussion. I feel like we're just getting going, but we had two very active people in our group, doing lots of things at home around veggie gardening, composting, looking at solar for their own homes, etc. And then we were just starting to get into a discussion about how, as people that are very active in our own homes, how can we connect with our neighbours around us? And so there was. Sophia had, the great suggestion of having conversations along the street and doing actions as a street community, whether that's looking at verge gardening or composting, but really, sort of acknowledging that's a really great way to engage your next door neighbours. And then Martin similarly is he lives in an apartment, but mentioned that he's on the strata committee, so that there's a community that he can engage with, and likewise. So we probably could have chatted a lot more, and I'd love to have kept it going.
Well, I'm hoping that we will again. It's amazing, isn't it? And yeah, I think it sometimes takes us a little while to unpack the really great stuff. Sorry. Yeah. Anything else, Peter? Sorry, I cut you off.
No, we also just touched on what skills that we sort of have within that small group, and clearly everyone comes with a set of experience that really lends to engaging everyone else around us. So
100%.
Whether that's technical or design or whatever. Yep.
Brilliant. Oh, that's exciting. All right, who else have we got? Jacob, how did your group go?
Yeah, we had a great group. I was with Nicola, Lee, and Eunice. We really spoke about how to activate schools as a space and also as a community, and integrating lessons into curriculum. We had a really good chat about reuse, using Marketplace and taking different things. And I think we sort of came across like there is a bit of an obstacle in terms it's not available for everybody. Something might be too bulky. They may not know how to do it. Perhaps there could be champions to actually help take items that would otherwise be thrown away and that are still, someone mentioned the line, one man's trash is another man's treasure. Lee, who's in the community as well and associated with CSIRO, and spoke about, activating some of these champions in our community. So that's something that we'd love to follow up, and just a great example of someone using that sphere of influence.
Awesome. Sally, how'd you go?
Sorry. Yes, similar to everybody else, actually. We discussed a lot of those issues that have already been raised. So one thing we were thinking of is, wouldn't it be amazing if we could change the consumerism and the materialism that we have in our society, and helping educate people into realizing that you don't have to have massive, huge, whopping great things in, you know, that you can actually live quite simply and sustainably by reusing and recycling and being content with what we've got. So yeah, so that was one of the things that we chatted about. Of course, it's a bit of a, you know, a bit of a pipe dream, but it's a thought. But again, we were also talking a lot about how the waste that we see on the curb when it's council collection time, how we can actually use that in a better way and help to use the stuff that's still in pretty good nick, and residents might be able to come and take what they would like, but there doesn't seem to be the opportunity to do that at the moment. So perhaps we can think about that down the track. So yeah, so those were just some of the things we talked about.
Fantastic. And Marnie, you were in a separate group, or were you in one of the others?
And that's a perfect segue, Sally, because we had Gemma who was talking about a creative reuse centre. So I think that very much aligns with your last point there. So we were talking about some of the initiatives, and then we turned our attention to how the community might act as champions to progress some of these initiatives that we want to take forward. So Peter was talking about EVs, so that real need to look at the education component of EVs and continue with the EV demo days. And he has co-hosted those for council before. So a real asset in Peter that we've got someone with that technical knowledge. He's also opened his home for us to go and have a look at that. And I think Gemma, she has 95% of her house is from reused furniture. So another invitation to go and look at her home. So that just sparked something for me, that these kind of videos or home opens or examples of how the community are doing things and actually, you know, conveying that from the community would be a great initiative moving forward. So James was talking about renovations and the fact that people are still putting in gas appliances. That's an area that we really want to look at, but that kind of, you know, looking at electrifying things like gas appliances, educating residents. But we turned our attention to those conversations that need to happen, and that idea that council is in a really good position to provide a toolkit or the resources to champion. So rather than it being nagging a neighbour, it's like, did you know there's a rebate? Did you know that this is the reason why we don't want to be putting gas appliances in, and this and that? So really using council's resources so that the community can kind of convey what they need to convey in a way with council support. So we also talked about looking at a different way to engaging. So like interior design is kind of like a good way to look at, you know, how you might reuse things in your home, but from a different perspective. So, you know, people are interested in interior design and making their home beautiful. So a different way to engage in these kind of sustainability issues. Right. I hope that got everything, Peter, James and Gemma.
Excellent. And I think, Anuj, were you in a different room as well, or were you in one of those others?
No, it was a different group. So I had Nathan and Michelle, who both volunteered to actually talk about it. I'll be very happily let them summarize it too.
If you'd like to, yeah, that would be wonderful.
Have a go, Michelle. I mean, we switched over from an energy group to a waste group because both were interested in waste. Nathan has been working for support, so we've got some great expertise there.
So did you want to throw to, who did you want?
Nathan or Michelle?
It'd be lovely to hear from you, Nathan. Michelle.
Yeah, I'm ready. I was going to give Michelle the first crack.
Okay, Michelle.
Oh no, Nathan, I'm all shy now. You do it.
You have gone shy. You've thrown me under the bus.
Excellent. I love it. It's great.
we were really talking about how Michelle brought up the idea of educating your friends, talking to your neighbour. They were some of her phrases that were coming up, and we're talking about in strata how difficult it could be, and perhaps there was a way that council could be a little bit more proactive when someone joined the region or joined the area, joined a strata through rates or something like that. They had some form of information that helped them understand what really was available to them. As one of the ideas. I was sharing that I'm only new with Subpod, but I know lots of councils use a lot of Subpods through what's it called?
Compost Revolution. Yeah,
Compost Revolution, and we've got a new product which is like a world first coming in April, May, which is designed for urban and high rise. So it's kind of like the size of a barbecue, but it looks really cool. And it's got IoT devices on there. It's got sunlights on there, so it'll actually measure. And it's on wheels, so you can move it around and grow food, but also process close to 7 kilos of food waste per week.
Wow.
So it's primarily a food waste engine, but the offset of that is you can grow beautiful things around it. And we've one of the little secret things that we haven't really spoken about is we're creating an IoT device that will work in, like an Internet of Things, that'll work in with your compost caddy that you use in your kitchen. And when that gets to a certain weight, 5 liters, 5 kilos or so, and you enter that and you put it in, and it actually registers that that has entered into the compost, in the near future, you may be entitled to carbon credits.
Wow.
So it is, we're looking at working along the blockchain, so it's authenticated, and that is something that every person could have an impact. But if you've got a garden, you can have a bigger bed, you could actually be doing this for others.
Amazing.
So we did talk about shared composting on street if it was not in an apartment.
Yeah, there's a real incentive there, isn't there, to suddenly mobilize an awful lot of people. That's exciting, and I love how you've obviously used you know, your strengths and your insights and what you're already involved in as well. Thank you for sharing, Nathan. That's amazing. We're getting close to the end, not the end of this. We're really getting close to the end of the start. So we're really excited because I think I can feel an energy from the people we've spoken to. I hope you can feel it. I think that energy comes from realizing it's not just you that are trying to tackle these issues. They are immense, they are profound, they are distressing, but they are solvable. And I think that's an incredibly empowering position to be in. So yeah, I'm going to get Karen to stop sharing. I'm going to just quickly share the last little bit, and Emma's going to wrap up our evening. Thank you for hanging on. I've tried to finish a little bit under, but yeah, thanks for sticking around to the end. It's certainly been incredibly yeah, great to hear all your thoughts and insights. I'll just quickly share that last little bit for you. No, I won't. I just had that final screen, Emma, sorry. And it's not letting me see it. Maybe I'll just let you wrap up and we'll share that.
That's okay. Yeah, we're gonna send an email out to all of you and the rest of the Nets Area Champions group as well, just to summarize tonight, and we'll send you all the links to everything in the Facebook group and how you can do that. So don't worry too much about taking notes, but I just did really want to let you know what we're going to do from here. So we're really, as I said, going to review feedback from this evening and go through all of your fantastic comments. We've got all the chat and the session has been recorded. So I know people that had to drop out earlier. We're going to send all that information to them. We're going to identify key projects and opportunities from that, and of course, collaboratively decide with you what we want to move forward with, where we can engage you, where you think council can come in. More importantly, we really want this to be a kind of self-empowered group. You know, if you meet someone through the Facebook group or chat tonight that you feel, you know, you could work together on something, we're very, you know, encouraging in terms of wanting you to do that. I know someone mentioned a toolkit, so I'm very keen to develop a champion toolkit where we can actually put all of these resources together so that when you actually go out to your neighbour, to your community, put some posts on social media, we're going to give you all of that. Obviously, you know, you've got your own knowledge, you've got some really informed people here tonight that are doing great things at home. But I think we just want a toolkit. Some of the conversations are difficult. We want to break that down and just let you know exactly what council can offer. And of course, to spread the word. So feel free to contact us. The email that you would have received communications on, the sustainability@KRG email. You can always email questions and suggestions through to that. Thanks, Joe. So there you go. So there's all the details. We are in the process of looking at our website at the moment to make it more friendly for people that are not currently engaged in this discussion, so that we're not preaching to the converted. So we will, that's something that we'll actually involve all of you in, and we can take you on that journey. But we do have a Facebook, Twitter, YouTube account. So if any of you want to go and explore that, if you've got any suggestions for posts, you know, you can do that. So the Facebook group again is just Net Zero Ku-ring-gai. So you can wait for the email after this event where we'll take you through how to join those groups. Otherwise, you can just type it into your search panel in Facebook and it will come up. So it is a private group. You'll have to, you know, I'll give you obviously permission to go into there, but feel that you can share ideas and things in there without the wider community being able to see that. And finally, thank you to all our presenters tonight, Jacob, Marnie, Andy, and of course, Joe, and for giving your time and enthusiasm to this project. So I'm grateful that everyone stayed on to the end. I think we had some, what will be the start of this discussion. So this is by no means an end. This is just the beginning of the journey. We look forward to sharing the next steps in the net zero journey with you very soon. And most of all, have a great rest of the evening, everyone, and try to stay dry. So thanks again, and we'll be in touch.
Great. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, bye-bye. Good night.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Well done. Thanks for that, Council. Okay.
Thanks, everyone.
I just saved that chat. Karen, I don't know if you've done it as well, but you can just press the little
Good to see you, Marty.
three dots. Excellent. How'd we go, guys?
That was fantastic.
Yeah.
Isn't it good? I think we managed, it was sort of total of 48, I think, with drop in and drop out. So that was pretty good.
Yeah. Oh, someone's jumping in now. They're like, so good, I'm coming back.
She's coming back. There she
Oh,
goes.
no, it was great, guys. Yeah, I feel like I learned so much from Andy and from you, Marnie. It was really, I was expecting to feel really doom and gloomy, but I feel actually really inspired, which is good.
He was very definite, wasn't he? He was very definite. He's like, it's bad, but there is a, you know, we can get there.
Be, right? Like, I mean, that's the whole fundamentally what he's got to say to, governments and everything.
He did a great job of turning things around, and it was a lot easier for me to transition to my speech because he actually was, you know, much more positive. It just wasn't that kind of doom and gloom, and really good to have him with some of the population questions and those that are persistent on just getting those viewpoints forward, where he's like, it's a 20-year plan, we can't achieve it, let's kind of get something.
Let's for solutions, focus on solutions. And he just kept, that was great.
But I think the challenge with this group will be channeling all that energy into things that are related to net zero in a way where we need to also be quite selective of what we're going to support, because it needs to be impactful from our point of view. So it'll be interesting, but so good, all the energy and ideas and group.
Yeah, no, you're right. And I think it was interesting how, I don't know if your groups felt this way, but Emma and my group were in, was so focused on individual action, which is great. But then, and I think that's what you found, Peter, is that once you got past that, once they were able to say, these are all the things I'm doing at home. Oh yeah, by the way, I'm involved in this church and I'm really thinking of doing this. And by the way, I'm a school teacher and I'm doing that, you know, and that can take a while for people to get past. And they sometimes think, you know, I really got to just get rid of every other piece of plastic in my house before I feel like I'm actually doing this. And I don't know how to communicate the fact that that's really not the most impactful thing. In fact, it's not going to make a difference to net zero in Ku-ring-gai, but still good to do. But it's a really interesting piece.
I actually thought Andy's comment was one of the most crucial for us about the most important thing being checking your super.
Yeah,
I'm not sure how we can really integrate that. And it's a bit of a tightrope for us because, you know, but giving people the tools to vote with their money and with their super, that's something that I think we should really integrate.
Other councils have actually held financial sessions, so sustainable finance or whatever you want to call eco-finance. So you can actually put it in the hands of another presenter, you know, so it's not council speaking and they make their own choices and
or in the hands of a champion who asks Andy, hey, I'm a champion, what's the best way for me to facilitate discussion through this Facebook group and get this happening in the community?
That's brilliant. We might need to we might ask that guy Pedro on the Facebook page.
Pedro's frozen.
Pedro's frozen. He looks a bit creepy, but that's all right. He's come back.
I think the other challenge we're going to have is I think we've got a really core diligent group who obviously stayed on to the end. And then we've got others, I think, maybe who there was probably a little bit of not quite sure what this is.
Yeah.
So we can probably take that learning, I think, into the next session where maybe we, you know, we do crystallize it a little bit more.
There was quite a few people who dropped out at that transition from information to contribution. And they were like, that's it, I'm done now. And they even said things like, would love to know next steps, see ya. And they're gone.
But spell it out. Yeah. it's interesting. And look, it is hard in this format. I think you obviously wouldn't have lost them if it was face-to-face. Well, you'd hope not.
I would be interested in including that Mentimeter question in the email and giving them another chance to actually go and enter some of their stuff.
Yeah, I think so too. And it's something that people will actually percolate on for a bit too. They'll actually, I did a workshop last week and I've been getting text messages from people who attended saying, hey, I've had this great idea. It's taken me a week. And I'm like, thank you. Please don't message me. But yeah, it does sometimes simmer for a bit.
Yeah. And I think too, you'll always have your instigators, and it might be that those that kind of want to be involved, but they're not as ambitious as the others might join the group and then find that there's a project that appeals to them that someone else is leading that they can get involved in, and it's much more tangible, like, oh, that's what I can do. But it might be a bit scary to think overall what my impact or what my contribution could be. So I think that will evolve over time.
And I think you said early on, Emma, you don't want 100 community members having 100 projects. Like, you prefer that there was a robust program that people were getting behind anyway, as opposed to 1,000 fractured little things that, you know. But yeah, I think it's, you know, it certainly feels like there's a momentum there again, and that will be exciting to see.
I think the toolkit will help, I think, with that, because you're going to get that sort of underlying bottom line where they will be happy to share it with people when it's convenient, or if it's easy. They may not be those people, as you said, Marnie, the instigators that want to be out the front doing all the stuff. But I think if we're offering different layers of opportunities, once we have our actions, you know, we're not going to be able to do everything with the champions group. So I think it'll be really interesting to sift through some of the stuff. I think also that follow-up email will be really important, because I think maybe some people weren't quite sure what it was all about. And now that they do know, maybe, Joe, as you said, they'll go off and come up with some other ideas.
Just on the toolkit, I'm curious to know, Joe, are there any toolkits out there that assist a single person to engage the street on, you know, if they've got an idea like community composting, or they want to go out and get quotes for solar with the whole street? Does that sort of toolkit exist? Is that something?
No, it's something that we should have, actually, because it's kind of critical. And there's some good one. I think we might have gently touched on this before. No, but I mean, other than a little bit of the work we did with Fight for Planet A, but again, and that has a community action toolkit around food waste, food, energy, and transport. But
might be able to cherry pick from a few different things.
But I feel like it's a different piece. Like, I heard it a lot tonight that people would really like to talk to their neighbours or their people in their building about this, but they don't know how to do that, and that would be a very intimidating experience for them, and potentially a negative experience with their neighbours. And so that would be a really risky thing to do. And, you know, if they don't have a strong relationship, who knows if it actually even be useful. But I think it's worth exploring. It certainly would make council's job a hell of a lot easier.
It almost feels like it, like, because what I saw tonight was like all these things that they're doing in their own home, so well aligned to what, like, the support that council offers through all its programs. But then the missing link was that connection. How to then connect with the neighbours immediately around them. And I've not seen that that sort of resource out there either.
The thing that I like probably the most is the Zero Emission Sydney North. Have you seen anything that they've done? They've done a little, and I'm happy to introduce you to Ursula. She's designed it up for Mossman community, but it's 100 actions you can take, and actually quantifies the emissions for each action. And so it focuses on, and I'll find it and send it, but she offers that as, you know, and